So welcome. Thank you, Patrick. Thank you, Matt. Chris wants to live stream this
I'm gonna try.
from a 3D camera
I think it's working.
to Facebook.
It's like way worse than spectacles, but
Yeah.
we'll see.
So while Chris sets that up, I'll set this up and introduce Chris briefly. And so Chris has been in the startup world for a long time. He's also been in the corporate world. So on the corporate side, Google, and then more recently Uber. Since leaving Uber 6 months ago or thereabouts, he has been working on a stealth startup, which he's not going to tell us about today. Although we may ask. And I think that generally Chris has been one of these more active, more thoughtful people posting about sort of conversational software, conversational interfaces out there. And so it's nice to have you here. So welcome. He's also invented the hashtag. We've got to mention that sort of.
That was 10 years ago.
Yeah, I know, but they're still around. So let me start. Let me start actually with the last point on the slide up there, which was the multimodal computing that Patrick talked about briefly. So multimodal, or what some people refer to as continuous computing. Let's talk a little bit about how you think about sort of, text-based bots, the world of voice, this device in my kitchen, whether it's Alexa or Google Home or a Apple smart speaker, and my phone and all my other interactions with computing. So how do you think about those things?
So I think this is like an incredibly important and interesting question and topic. I was in London last week at this connected car conference. I, as with most things, have no authority to speak about anything, but I get invited to talk about stuff, I guess, for some reason. And I was sort of, I guess, pointing out that the way that we think about things in Silicon Valley tends to be sort of, we don't end up having a lot of nostalgia, which I think actually frees us up from resting on our laurels and sort of taking for granted successes that we've had and then sticking with that. So when it comes to, I guess, where we're going, the large arc that I would sort of look at is from the early days of computing and sort of delivering computing experiences to the military world and the business world and the academic world, and then eventually getting into personal computing. And what happened 10 years ago with the launch of the iPhone was that we had a really big disruptor of the web platform. The web platform was, again, driven from academia, looking to share information. The kind of information that the military was trying to share was for strategic advantage over basically the Russians in the Cold War, and we're still, I guess, fighting that battle. But what's interesting is that was very much a read-only kind of world. And the App Store changed the name of the game, especially for businesses, and said, look, you can take your brochureware website and turn it into an app, and no one's going to care, and no one's going to use it. If you really want to do something interesting with apps, you have to actually open up an API and allow people to deeply integrate themselves into your business and to affect things. So when it comes to, for example, booking flights, it's not about just looking up information, it's about actually booking the flight and making the purchase. So in the last 10 years, we've seen a lot of patterns emerge for building and designing APIs and then deploying them at scale. And along the way, we took concepts from the desktop, little chiclets that we call apps, and brought them into this mobile app world. So if we have 10 years of development of APIs, suddenly we're in this sea of icons that we have to constantly think about jumping between in order to get to the functionality that we're actually trying to achieve. And as far as, I don't know about you guys, but for me, it's very hard for me to maintain a lookup table in terms of all the weird Silicon Valley names and the things that they actually do. So when it comes to thinking about where we're going and voice computing and conversational products, it really is about taking advantage of this new landscape and new environment of APIs and making them available through smart agents that can understand intent and map them to a number of service providers based on the context that the user's in to execute their request. And then once that happens, to realize that that user may go through lots of different contexts while they're actually trying to complete that task, which could be, again, booking flights, right? You go from sort of desktop, sort of seeing the landscape, then going to being on the road, and then maybe wanting to look it up in mobile, on a mobile device. And then at some later point, you come home and you're cooking dinner and you want to be like, are my flights still good, or what's happened there? You want to use voice. That continuous context is enabled by the advent of all these APIs being available now. And so I think we're moving away from that app-driven world because we don't need to live in that world as much anymore. And so we can adapt the experiences to the context that best suit them. I know this is very abstract and very broad.
Interesting. No, it's interesting. So there's two things I want to pull out of that. The first is that the vision of continuous computing that you just outlined is, I would say, is a very web vision. And yet today we're living in a world where a tremendous amount of the user touch points are controlled by a few number of platforms. You're broadcasting on one of them right now. And so, when we were backstage, you were like, which one should I broadcast? It was a short list, right? And so, so how do you think about the big platforms versus that sort of highly distributed, contextual data being pushed to the edge?
So one of the challenges that
we're 3 minutes or less.
God, sorry.
Yeah,
I'll try. One of the challenges that we have, of course, is that we have these new gatekeepers, and again, moving away from the web and static world of data being published and then kind of set and forgotten. We're living in a world now of synthesis and of making sort of splicing lots of data feeds together and making sense of them. Humans are not bad at doing that, and you can see this happening, with a lot of these live streams and video apps where you have stickers and you have other types of additive ways of being in the flow of some data stream and then adding new meaning or new context. Or augmented reality, for example, takes a feed in, kind of parses out different layers of information, and then injects new data layers onto that, which could be a tape measure or whatever it happens to be. The problem, though, is that each of these gatekeepers doesn't necessarily want to play with the other very openly. And so when it comes to the benefits that we have with the web, where there was a lot of interoperability, you could jump from one platform to the next, we're now being circumscribed to use one platform over another. And so right now, this stream is going to Facebook, and Facebook is able to add whatever augmented nonsense to it that it wants to, but people on Twitter, or actually my audience mostly is, are being left out. And so I think that there's a big question as to what that means when it comes to building not apps necessarily that live in app stores, but data streams that are synthesized and used by lots of these voice assistants to make sense of the world and to deliver services to people in these very discrete, distributed contexts.
Right. So, second thing I want to focus on for a minute is sort of what you've called conversational commerce, right? And so we have, first smart speaker in market of scale is put in market by largest e-commerce platform in the world. And so, why do you think this device, was it coincidental that Amazon, was the first guy first company to put a smart speaker into our homes, and now they want to put the same thing in, or something similar in our wardrobe? How do you think about that? Amazon's, the connection to commerce. I don't want to overplay the Amazon thing and replay the last question, which was really about platforms. This is not a platform question. It's really about the connection to commerce.
It's funny that Amazon is based in Seattle because it sort of blows my Silicon Valley perspective out of the water. But I guess when it comes to retail, you're looking at an industry that, of course, has a lot of sunk infrastructure in moving things around the way that it knows how to move things around. I would look at what Amazon is doing more as a lifestyle play and wanting to integrate itself into each consumer's life in a way that is personalized and responsive. And to do that, it needs to have a loop. And that loop is facilitated through conversational interactions, which include speaking to Amazon, through Alexa, or being seen by Alexa using computer vision. And so the other thing that I think is interesting relative to, let's say, Apple really, their business model is selling hardware devices. They as I said in my post about AirPods, they're basically a jewelry company that connects you to the internet. Whereas Amazon doesn't really care about the device or the product. They can make the Echo $12 or give it away for free to Prime members, or they could give you an entire security system that's all about internal home surveillance that would cost them thousands of dollars because they're going to make so much money off of you over the lifetime of your Prime membership that it all works out. Like, when it comes down to it, we're mastering the electron and applying that mastery in different ways to shape our computing devices in all sorts of ways that previously weren't possible because we didn't have the compute power, we didn't have the algorithms, and we didn't have the training data. Now we have a lot of those things, and they're coming together, and it's cost effective to actually put one of these supercomputers in your home that just senses stuff and just makes sense of your utterances and the way that you look, and can provide you with feedback and value to make your life more efficient and easier. So I guess I try to sort of maintain that higher level perspective on what Amazon might be up to as opposed to just disrupting retail. It's really about thinking about the future and about how people will and should live in an internet-saturated world. And that world is one in which, like Neo in The Matrix, where he's like, Tank, get me some guns, and then he's got all the guns ever, and it's like the best Amazon delivery experience you've ever imagined. Tank is basically Alexa's great-great-grandfather. I don't know if you guys made that connection, but he's actually an AI. So this idea has been out there for a long time. And the other thing that I was thinking about is how Kit, in Knight Rider, is sort of Hollywood's version of like a self-driving car. But yet when Google does it, it looks like Waymo. Whereas it's way over 3 minutes. In the Matrix, Amazon puts out the Echo Show, and it doesn't look anything like a Squiddy. Because these things need to be designed to be sort of acceptable. Anyways, if you haven't watched The Matrix, go watch it again, and this all makes sense. But the point is, they're being designed to sort of integrate into your life and to be friendly and sort of acceptable to bring about a very interesting new world order that is nothing like Big Brother's world, because he probably had very poor taste.
Yeah, I think that one of the things I think is so interesting about sort of the narrative you walked us through and how you're thinking about this and how you think about conversational commerce is that, so many companies saw a fundamental disruption as they moved from, the desktop web to the mobile web. I mean, Facebook, that was sort of a moment in Facebook's history where they reinvented the company, they did some key strategic acquisitions, and they broke apart the Big Blue app in a very fundamental way. Amazon, on the flip side, it's kind of fascinating that the shift to mobile did not affect Amazon the way it affected other the massive web platforms. But now, as commerce and conversation and computing is available anywhere, it has the potential to. And you could see them getting ahead of that in a really smart way.
I mean, the thing that your point sort of brings up is a question to me about urban versus suburban. In some respects, you can imagine Amazon actually was able to cater to the suburban audience for a very long time without really worrying about mobile. They had a very optimized desktop experience. They could run lots of experiments and keep iterating kind of in that world without needing to worry about mobile, whereas Facebook had to be a very urban, youth-motivated platform, and of course had to continue to appeal to youth in order to maintain its cool, and so had to move to mobile, and especially to grow internationally and globally, where mobile is a much bigger deal than in the United States. So what may be happening is that we're actually catching up to Amazon's mobile future, which happens to look nothing like kind of a glass-based screen, but has actually broken up the components of the phone and created specific computing appliances that you just buy and just have, and that's part of your relationship. That's part and parcel to the relationship that you have with Amazon. So I think that that's the real question. Do I want to have a relationship with Google through this weird, home device, or am I okay actually using Amazon in a very different way because it was never about the web and more about the convenience of getting whatever I wanted when I wanted it?
Tank. So last question for you is, where are we in the, as you think about voice, and Matt, in this few slides he put up on the screen, sort of drew the narrative voice all the way back to the beginning of sort of voice interactions, but also to podcasting and just general talk, audio, even touches talk radio. As you think about the transition to sort of voice computing and how it connects with that sort of continuous computing, model that you framed at the beginning. Where are we in that transition? Are we 5% there? Are we 50% there? Where are we in the evolution?
As Jeff Bezos said at the Code conference, we're sort of in the first inning and the first at-bat of this thing, and that was just a year ago. And I think that there's some validity to that for sure. We've come a long way, but in terms of understanding this new medium and how people are actually going to behave in it and what assumptions they're going to make, I mean, I think the most useful thing is to look at kids, to see people who are 4, 5, and 6 and are used to talking to their TV as opposed to swiping on it. We're still in that sort of generational switchover. And so when that happens, if I think back to 10 years ago and sort of proposing the hashtag, like Twitter was not a sure thing. Social media was not a sure thing. People were like, why are people doing this? Why are they sharing their lives? This stuff is stupid. And now people are like living for likes. If you imagine 10 years into the future, how we're going to sort of have relationships with these artificial intelligences that kind of inhabit our spaces in augmented reality and we go meet up with in virtual space or whatever, I don't even think we can like fathom how different things are going to be and how, walking down, it was interesting actually being in London, walking down the street with my AirPods in, I definitely got looks. Whereas in Silicon Valley, it's not quite that unusual, but we're still in a world where I think people are holding their computing devices, no pun intended, kind of at arm's length, as opposed to actually really embracing them. And the next and subsequent generations are fully living with them as they do stuffed animals and talking to them and expecting that that's how everything should be. So as that transition takes place, it's going to be profound and it's going to change everything. But I think we're at the very, very, very early stages of this stuff actually making sense.
Awesome. Thank you, Chris. That was great. Thank you.
Thank you.